Empaths, it's your girl, Keely Taverna. Today, this video is all about love and risk. Now, the reality is empaths, you cannot love without taking risks. That's the way it goes. There are no guarantees. But often, especially for the empaths who have had difficult relationships, we may be scared to love again. We may opt out of loving again. And as such, we could be missing out on a much more fulfilling life. However, because we're not conscious, we may end up in relationships where we actually don't have to commit. It's one of the reasons I believe that many empaths end up in one-way relationships with emotionally unavailable people. Because at an unconscious level, the question is, does being with someone who's emotionally unavailable keep you safe? Now, obviously, this isn't something you want, right? This is where we get into conflict because naturally you want wholehearted love, but at an unconscious level, you keep on finding yourself in situations with people who are emotionally unavailable. And if that speaks to you, this video is definitely for you. It's your gal, Keely Taverna, psychotherapist, who's passionate about helping empaths break free of one-way relationships because we want to live a good life, right? Absolutely. And don't you want to love wholeheartedly? You see, the reality is often when we find ourselves in one-way relationships, we need to ask ourselves difficult questions. For example, empaths, you ignoring the red flags. Many of us, for whatever reason, we ignore the red flags. Often I find it can be linked to desperation. Now, that's not something we go around declaring, hi, I'm desperate to be in love. However, when we avoid naming or having conversations about difficult behaviors that we may see, can we really complain when we end up in relationships that are not healthy for us? Can we really complain? Boy, I'm getting hot today. How can we complain if we actually ignored the red flags? Did we not do it to ourselves? I'm a massive believer that we create our reality, and we create our reality through the vehicle of our choices. So some of the uncomfortable questions you may need to ask yourselves when we ignore red flags: am I doing it to myself? Now, one of the reasons why we may not want to bring up red flag behaviors often is linked to our desperate need to be in relationship, our desperate need to be in love. And so we may fear that by bringing these things up, we spoil the relationship. However, actually, it's actually a wonderful opportunity to test the caliber of the relationship, to see if there is mutual ground for conversation, for dialogue, so that you can understand what might be going on. If that person decides that they're not going to acknowledge it, or they'll justify it, deny it, explain it away, my hope for you as an evolving empath is you also begin to, tap into your own intuition. It's not healthy for empaths to be disconnected from their intuition. That often results in us having to learn the hard way. It results in us ignoring our feelings, going full steam ahead, and then before you know it, things crumble, and then we're like, well, I always knew. Well, as an evolving empath, how can you keep doing that to yourself? Sometimes you have to ask yourself, it's a form of self-harm. When you choose to ignore red flags, when you choose to go full steam ahead, and then things go wrong, what is that about? Why weren't you able to articulate? What was your fear? We must face our fears. Sometimes I know we may want to have conversations, difficult conversations, especially in our relationships. And the reality is, you may have to face your fear. If someone doesn't want to communicate with you, if someone doesn't want to have the conversation or gaslights you, stonewalls you, what do? They're all uncomfortable choices to make. However, we are responsible for our own lives, and it takes two to tango. But if someone doesn't want to tango with you, you still have a choice to make. Often one of the biggest problems for us empaths is we don't like the choices that are available to us. But such is life. Like I said, back again, you cannot love without having risk. There is always going to be risk when you love. The risk of loss, the risk of hurt. However, if you choose never to love again and to sit on the side, to be a spectator of life, that's fine. I know many people who choose to live that way and they believe it keeps them safe. It's their choice. However, I firmly believe that if you choose to live that way, it may mean that the legacy of the person who harmed you yesteryear still lives on in your now. I don't know about you, but I do not want the legacy of what's happened to me yesteryear, the hurts, the pains, the frustrations, to hinder my future. So you have a choice to make. Because at some level, if you choose not to risk again, not to love again, or you end up with emotionally unavailable people, which is more or less the same thing, the reality is often the historical stuff is actually impeding you in the now. Does that make sense? You're scared to love again because of what happened to you. So Derek from 1985 is still impacting you in 2022, which is why you're not able to love wholeheartedly again. And no matter what, love is a beautiful thing. There are no guarantees, but that's life. Life offers us no guarantees bar one, death. But to love is a beautiful thing. Never forget that. To risk is a beautiful thing. Life is a risk. So what chances might you need to take? So sometimes, especially if you've had hectic relationships, sometimes you may need to take a chance on yourself, like invest in yourself, work on yourself, so you become much more clearer about what it is that you want for yourself as a separate identity. I think culturally, we're often told that relationships should complete us, or you're not settled down if you're in a relationship. And there's this heavy expectation that relationships will fulfill us, which is not necessarily the truth. We all know people who are in relationships that they ain't so great, So one of the things you might want to take a risk on is working on yourself. That will give you much more clarity about who you are, actually the people that you want to be with. Also help you to advocate for yourself. Us empaths, we're not great at advocating for ourselves. So I hope this video is of benefit to you. If you've got any comments, please leave them below. Any questions, feel free to ask. It's your gal, Kili Taverner. Today we've been talking all things love and risk. And the reality is, you cannot love without risk. There are no guarantees in life. What's that saying? Better to have loved than to have never loved at all. Do take care of you, because if you don't, no one's coming to save you. You must learn to save yourself.